What happens when the future king discovers that everything he believed about his family's legacy was built on a foundation of lies? When Prince Alexander of Valdoria finds a hidden vault beneath the ancient palace library, he uncovers documents that could destroy the monarchy forever. But some secrets are buried so deep that unearthing them might cost him his crown, his family, and his life. In a kingdom where tradition rules supreme, one young prince must choose between protecting the throne and exposing the truth that could set his nation free from centuries of deception. The story begins on a stormy night in the kingdom of Valdoria, where lightning illuminates more than just the sky. The storm that struck the kingdom of Valdoria on the night of October 15th would be remembered not for its fierce winds or torrential rain, but for what it revealed in the depths of the ancient Blackstone Palace. Prince Alexander Mortimer stood at his bedroom window, watching lightning split the sky above the capital city of Aurelia. At 28, he possessed the commanding presence expected of a future king, with dark hair that caught the light and green eyes that seemed to see through people's carefully constructed facades. Thunder rolled across the palace grounds as Alexander turned away from the window. Tomorrow marked the 10th anniversary of his grandfather King Edmund's death, and the entire kingdom would gather to honor the beloved monarch who had ruled for 53 years. But tonight, Alexander felt restless, unable to shake the feeling that something significant was about to change. The palace corridors stretched before him like arteries through the heart of the monarchy. Blackstone Palace had housed the Mortimer family for over 400 years, its Gothic architecture a testament to the enduring power of the crown. Alexander's footsteps echoed against the marble floors as he made his way toward the library, seeking solace in the familiar comfort of ancient books and historical documents. The royal library occupied the entire east wing of the palace, with soaring ceilings and mahogany shelves that reached toward ornate moldings. Thousands of leather-bound volumes lined the walls, their gold lettering gleaming in the soft light of crystal chandeliers. Alexander had spent countless hours here as a child, hiding among the stacks while his tutors searched for him, losing himself in tales of knights and distant kingdoms. As he entered the library, another flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed immediately by a tremendous crack of thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the palace. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely, plunging the vast space into darkness. Alexander reached for his phone, using its flashlight to navigate through the familiar space. He made his way toward the rare book section, where first editions and ancient manuscripts were housed behind glass cases. But as he rounded a corner near the medieval history collection, he stopped abruptly. The lightning strike had done more than interrupt the power supply. A section of the ornate wood paneling along the eastern wall had shifted, revealing a gap that shouldn't exist. Alexander moved closer, his phone's light dancing across the unexpected opening. The wood paneling, which he had assumed was solid, had apparently been jarred loose by the building's movement during the storm. Behind the false panel lay darkness that seemed to swallow his phone's meager light. Alexander hesitated for only a moment before pushing against the loosened wood, which gave way easily under pressure. The gap widened, revealing a narrow passageway that disappeared into the bowels of the palace. Cool air flowed from the hidden passage, carrying with it the musty scent of age and secrets long buried. Alexander's pulse quickened as he realized he had discovered something that had been concealed for decades, possibly centuries. The rational part of his mind suggested he should wait until morning, gather proper lighting, perhaps inform the palace security team. But curiosity proved stronger than caution. He squeezed through the opening and found himself in a narrow corridor that stretched beyond the reach of his light. The walls were rough stone, far older than the elegant facades that decorated the public areas of the palace. His footsteps sounded different here, muffled by years of dust and the weight of hidden history. The passage descended gradually, leading him deeper beneath the palace than he had ever imagined possible. Ancient torch brackets lined the walls at regular intervals, their iron fittings black with age. The air grew cooler as he descended, and Alexander pulled his sweater close around his shoulders. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 minutes, the narrow passage opened into a circular chamber carved directly from the bedrock beneath the palace. Alexander's phone light swept across the room, revealing something that made him catch his breath in wonder and disbelief. The chamber contained what appeared to be a private study, preserved in time like a museum exhibit. A heavy oak desk dominated the center of the room, its surface covered with papers and documents that seemed untouched by the passage of years. Shelves lined the curved walls, filled with books, scrolls, and wooden boxes that promised to contain treasures beyond imagination. Alexander approached the desk slowly, his light revealing details that made his heart race. The paper scattered across the surface bore the royal seal of Valdoria, but not the current version he knew so well. These seals were different, older, featuring symbols and text that he didn't immediately recognize. He picked up the nearest document, a piece of parchment that felt substantial beneath his fingers. The writing was in an archaic form of Valdorian, challenging to read but not impossible for someone with his classical education. As his eyes adjusted to the strange script, the words began to form meaning, and what he read made his blood run cold. The document was dated 1847 and bore the signature of King Leopold III, Alexander's great-great-grandfather. But the content was unlike anything in the official historical records. It spoke of treaties signed in secret, of agreements that contradicted everything Alexander had been taught about his family's legacy. According to this document, King Leopold had made a pact with foreign powers that essentially sold Valdoria's independence in exchange for personal wealth and protection. The kingdom that Alexander had always believed fought valiantly for its freedom had actually been secretly controlled by outside forces for over a century and a half. His hands trembling slightly, Alexander set down the first document and reached for another. This one was more recent, dated 1923, and signed by his great-grandfather, King Victor. The content was even more disturbing. It detailed how the royal family had systematically deceived the people of Valdoria about their true circumstances, maintaining the illusion of independence while secretly serving foreign interests. The document spoke of rigged elections, manufactured crises designed to distract the population, and elaborate schemes to channel the kingdom's natural resources to foreign corporations while keeping the profits within the royal coffers. Every major historical event that Alexander had studied, every moment of national pride he had been taught to cherish, was revealed to be part of an intricate web of lies. As Alexander continued reading, he discovered references to a network of secret advisors who had guided royal policy for generations. These shadowy figures, representing interests far beyond Valdoria's borders, had apparently orchestrated everything from economic policies to royal marriages. Even his own parents' union, which he had always believed to be a love match, was revealed to be a carefully arranged alliance designed to strengthen certain business connections. The implications were staggering. If these documents were authentic, then the entire foundation of the Valdorian monarchy was built on deception and betrayal. The people of Valdoria believed they lived in a sovereign nation, ruled by a family dedicated to their welfare. In reality, they were subjects of an elaborate puppet show, with the royal family serving as willing actors in a drama scripted by foreign powers. Alexander's mind raced as he tried to process what he was reading. How many people knew the truth? His father, King Charles, certainly must be aware of at least some of these arrangements. The current Prime Minister, Lord Pemberton, whose family had served the crown for 3 generations, probably understood the real nature of their governance. But what about the people of Valdoria? What about the parliament members who believed they were making decisions in the nation's best interest? What about the military officers who had sworn oaths to protect the kingdom's sovereignty? Were they all unwitting participants in this massive deception, or were there layers of complicity that extended throughout the government? As these questions swirled through his mind, Alexander heard footsteps echoing from the passage above. Someone was coming. He quickly gathered several of the most significant documents, folding them carefully and tucking them inside his jacket. His phone's battery was running low, but he managed to take several photographs of other papers before the light began to dim. The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied now by voices he couldn't quite make out. Alexander looked around the chamber desperately, searching for another exit. In the far corner, partially hidden by a tall bookshelf, he spotted what appeared to be another passage. He quickly made his way to the hidden exit, squeezing through just as light began to filter down from the main passage. Behind him, he heard voices becoming clearer as the searchers entered the secret chamber. He recognized one of them as Jameson, the head of palace security, but the others were unfamiliar. The second passage was even narrower than the first, forcing Alexander to move slowly through the darkness. His phone's battery finally died, leaving him to navigate by touch alone. The passage seemed to wind upward, taking him back toward the main levels of the palace, but emerging somewhere different from where he had started. After several minutes of careful movement, Alexander saw faint light ahead. The passage ended at what appeared to be another concealed entrance, this one behind a tapestry in the portrait gallery. He emerged carefully, listening for any signs of activity before stepping into the familiar corridor. The storm had passed, and emergency lighting had restored some illumination to the palace. Alexander made his way back to his private quarters, his mind churning with everything he had discovered. The documents hidden in his jacket felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds, their implications threatening to crush everything he had believed about his life and his future. In his room, Alexander spread the stolen documents across his desk and studied them more carefully. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The kingdom of Valdoria was not what it appeared to be, and his family had been perpetuating a massive fraud for generations. As dawn broke over the palace, painting the ancient stones in shades of gold and rose, Prince Alexander faced the most difficult decision of his life. He could return the documents to their hiding place, pretend he had never seen them, and continue living the comfortable lie that had defined his existence. Or he could pursue the truth, no matter where it led or what it cost him. The coronation ceremony that would make him king was only 18 months away. In less than 2 years, he would swear an oath to serve and protect the people of Valdoria. But how could he take that oath, knowing that the very institution he represented was built on deception? Outside his window, the people of Aurelia were beginning their daily routines, unaware that their future king had just discovered secrets that could shatter their understanding of everything they held dear. Market vendors set up their stalls in the shadow of the palace walls, children walked to school past monuments to fallen heroes, and government workers prepared for another day of serving what they believed to be their sovereign nation. Alexander watched them through his window and felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a lead cloak. These people trusted him, trusted his family, trusted the institutions that govern their lives. Did he have the right to destroy that trust in the name of truth? Or did he have an obligation to preserve their peace of mind, even if it meant perpetuating the lies that had shaped their world? The documents on his desk seemed to whisper accusations in the morning light. Kings who had sold their subjects freedom for personal gain. Treaties that reduced a proud nation to a puppet state. Generations of royal family members who had chosen wealth and security over honor and honesty. As Alexander contemplated his impossible choice, he realized that his discovery in the hidden chamber was only the beginning. If he chose to pursue the truth, he would need to understand the full scope of the deception, identify all the players in this centuries-long conspiracy, and figure out how to expose the lies without destroying the kingdom in the process. The young prince had entered the palace library the night before as a man preparing to inherit a throne. He emerged from the secret chamber as someone who might have to choose between saving a crown and saving his soul. The memorial service for King Edmund proceeded with all the pomp and ceremony befitting a beloved monarch. Alexander stood between his parents on the cathedral steps, watching thousands of citizens file past his grandfather's statue in the palace square. Their faces showed genuine grief and respect for a king they remembered as wise, compassionate, and devoted to his people. If only they knew the truth. Alexander maintained his composure throughout the ceremony, but his mind was elsewhere. The documents hidden in his private safe seemed to burn in his consciousness, their revelations making every word of the memorial service feel like another layer of deception. Bishop Carlisle spoke eloquently about King Edmund's dedication to Valdorian independence and prosperity, apparently unaware that both had been illusions carefully maintained for foreign masters. After the public ceremonies concluded, the royal family gathered for a private dinner in the palace's smaller dining room. King Charles, Alexander's father, appeared more relaxed now that the official obligations were finished. Queen Isabella, Alexander's mother, seemed genuinely moved by the day's events, her eyes still slightly red from tears shed during the cathedral service. "Grandfather would have been pleased with today's turnout," Alexander's younger sister, Princess Sophia, commented, cutting into her roasted duck. At 25, she shared Alexander's dark hair, but had inherited their mother's warm brown eyes. She worked as a patron for several children's charities and was genuinely beloved by the people. "The people haven't forgotten what he meant to this kingdom," King Charles replied, raising his wine glass. "To King Edmund, who preserved Valdoria's independence through some of our most challenging times." Alexander nearly choked on his wine. The irony of his father's toast was almost unbearable. According to the documents he had discovered, King Edmund had been one of the most complicit monarchs in the family's history, actively expanding the secret agreements that kept Valdoria under foreign control. "Are you feeling well, Alexander?" Queen Isabella asked, noticing his discomfort. "You've seemed distracted all day." "Just tired, Mother. It's been an emotional day for all of us." Princess Sophia studied her brother's face with the perceptive eye that had always made her difficult to deceive. "You look like you haven't slept. Have you been spending too much time in the library again?" The innocent question hit closer to home than Sophia could have imagined. Alexander forced a smile. "You know how I get when there's a lot on my mind." "Books help me think," King Charles nodded approvingly. "Your grandfather was the same way. He used to say that understanding history was the key to making good decisions for the future." Another wave of bitter irony washed over Alexander. If King Edmund had truly understood history, he would have known that selling his kingdom's sovereignty was a betrayal of everything the monarchy was supposed to represent. Instead, he had chosen personal comfort over national honor, just like his predecessors. The conversation continued around topics of royal duties and upcoming state functions. Alexander participated minimally, his thoughts consumed by questions about how deep the deception ran. Did his mother know? She had married into the family from neighboring Astoria, supposedly as part of a diplomatic alliance. But perhaps even that marriage had been orchestrated by the same shadowy forces that controlled everything else. What about Sophia? She seemed genuinely committed to her charitable work and appeared to believe in the monarchy's mission to serve the people. If she knew the truth, she was either an excellent actress or had found a way to reconcile her conscience with the family's lies. After dinner, as the family moved to the drawing room for coffee and brandy, Alexander excused himself. I have some correspondence to review before tomorrow's meetings. Don't work too late, son, King Charles advised. You'll need your energy for the economic summit next week. The economic summit. Alexander wondered how many of the policies they would discuss had already been decided by foreign interests. How many of the trade agreements they would negotiate were designed to benefit powers beyond Valdoria's borders rather than its own citizens? Back in his private chambers, Alexander retrieved the documents from his safe and spread them across his study table. By lamplight, the aged parchment and faded ink seemed even more ominous than they had in the hidden chamber. He had spent the day trying to convince himself that what he had discovered might be forgeries, elaborate hoaxes designed to discredit his family. But the more he studied the papers, the more authentic they appeared. The writing styles matched other historical documents he had examined during his university studies. The seals bore the correct royal marks for their respective time periods. Most convincing of all, the documents referenced specific events and people that were not widely known outside official historical circles. If these were forgeries, they had been created by someone with extraordinary access to royal archives and historical expertise. Alexander turned his attention to a document he hadn't fully examined in his hurried escape from the secret chamber. This one was more recent than the others, dated just 15 years ago, and bearing his father's signature. The revelation it contained made Alexander's hand shake as he read. The document outlined a comprehensive plan to modernize Valdoria's economy through foreign investment and technological development. On the surface, it sounded like exactly the kind of progressive thinking the kingdom needed to remain competitive in the global marketplace. But reading between the lines revealed a different story entirely. The foreign investment came with strings attached that essentially gave outside corporations control over Valdoria's most valuable resources. The technological development was designed to create dependencies that would make it impossible for the kingdom to change course without catastrophic economic consequences. Every aspect of the modernization plan was structured to increase Valdoria's integration into a larger economic system controlled by the same powers that had been manipulating the kingdom for generations. Most disturbing of all, the document included provisions for what it euphemistically called population management. Reading the carefully worded passages, Alexander realized they described systematic efforts to influence public opinion, education curricula, and media coverage to ensure that the people of Valdoria remained compliant and unaware of their true circumstances. The schools that taught Valdorian children about their proud heritage of independence were actually using textbooks approved by foreign advisors. The newspapers that reported on government policies were receiving guidance on how to frame stories to minimize public criticism. Even the entertainment industry was being subtly shaped to promote values and attitudes that supported the hidden power structure. Alexander set the document aside and walked to his window, looking out over the sleeping city of Aurelia. Thousands of people lived their lives believing they were citizens of a free and sovereign nation. They paid taxes thinking the money would be used for their benefit. They voted in elections believing their choices mattered. They sent their children to serve in the military, believing they were protecting their homeland. All of it was theater, a carefully orchestrated performance designed to maintain the illusion of independence, while keeping the real power safely hidden from public view. The people of Valdoria were not citizens. They were unwitting actors in a play they didn't know they were performing. Alexander's phone buzzed with a text message from Lord Pemberton, the Prime Minister. Your Highness, I need to schedule a private meeting to discuss some sensitive matters regarding the economic summit. When would be convenient? The timing seemed suspicious. Had someone discovered that the secret chamber had been breached? Were there security measures in place that Alexander hadn't considered? Or was this genuinely about the economic summit, which would presumably involve negotiations that served the hidden interests rather than Valdoria's true needs? Alexander decided to respond carefully. I'm available tomorrow afternoon after the Veterans Memorial event. My private study at 3 o'clock would be suitable. The response came back immediately. Perfect. I'll bring some historical documents that provide important context for our discussions. Historical documents. The phrase sent a chill down Alexander's spine. Either this was an extraordinary coincidence, or Lord Pemberton knew exactly what Alexander had discovered. Given the scope of the conspiracy revealed in the secret chamber, it seemed likely that the Prime Minister was one of the key players in maintaining the deception. Alexander spent the rest of the evening researching the Pemberton family's history. What he discovered painted a disturbing picture of multiple generations serving as intermediaries between the royal family and foreign interests. Lord Pemberton's grandfather had been Prime Minister during some of the most significant secret negotiations. His father had overseen the implementation of several policies that now appeared designed to benefit outside powers rather than Valdoria's citizens. The current Lord Pemberton had taken office just 5 years ago, inheriting not only the Prime Ministership but also, apparently, his family's role in the conspiracy. His public record showed him to be an effective administrator and skilled diplomat. But viewing his accomplishments through the lens of the secret documents revealed a different interpretation of his successes. Trade agreements that had been praised for bringing foreign investment now looked like mechanisms for transferring control of Valdorian assets to outside corporations. Educational reforms that supposedly modernized the curriculum now appeared designed to shape young minds in ways that served foreign interests. Even environmental policies that protected Valdoria's natural beauty seemed to have hidden provisions that granted unusual access rights to specific international organizations. As Alexander delved deeper into his research, he began to understand the sophisticated nature of the system that controlled his kingdom. It wasn't a simple matter of foreign domination or economic exploitation. Instead, it was an intricate web of relationships, agreements, and dependencies that had been carefully constructed over generations to create the illusion of independence while maintaining external control. The genius of the system lay in its subtlety. The people of Valdoria weren't oppressed in any obvious way. Their standard of living was relatively high, their government appeared responsive to their needs, and their culture was preserved and celebrated. But beneath the surface, every significant decision was guided by interests that had nothing to do with Valdorian welfare. Alexander realized that exposing this conspiracy wouldn't be as simple as revealing the documents to the public. The system was too complex and too deeply embedded in every aspect of Valdorian society. The people would struggle to understand the implications, and those who did understand might prefer the comfortable lie to the difficult truth. Moreover, dismantling the system could have catastrophic consequences. Valdoria's economy was now so integrated with foreign interests that sudden independence might lead to financial collapse. The kingdom's defense agreements, trade relationships, and technological infrastructure were all tied to the hidden power structure. Breaking free might leave Valdoria vulnerable to chaos and possibly invasion. Yet continuing to participate in the conspiracy felt like betraying everything Alexander had been raised to believe about honor, duty, and service. How could he take an oath to protect his people while knowing that he was actually serving their hidden masters? How could he claim to represent Valdorian interests while implementing policies designed by foreign powers? The young prince found himself facing an impossible dilemma. Revealing the truth might destroy the kingdom he was supposed to inherit and protect. Concealing the truth would make him complicit in a betrayal that had lasted for generations. Either choice would exact a terrible price, and Alexander was beginning to understand that there might be no path forward that didn't involve enormous sacrifice. As dawn approached, Alexander made a decision that would shape everything that followed. He would meet with Lord Pemberton and carefully probe to determine how much the Prime Minister knew. Depending on what he learned, he would begin building a strategy to either expose the conspiracy or find a way to gradually dismantle it without destroying the kingdom in the process. But first, he needed to understand exactly who else was involved and how the system really worked. The documents he had discovered were only a fragment of the larger truth. Before he could decide how to act, he needed to know everything. Alexander locked the documents back in his safe and prepared for another day of royal duties, knowing that every smile, every speech, and every official act would now carry the weight of his terrible knowledge. The cheerful prince who had waved to crowds the day before was gone forever, replaced by a man who understood that the crown he was destined to wear was heavier than he had ever imagined. The game had begun, and Alexander was no longer just a player. He was about to discover whether he could become the one who changes the rules. The Veterans Memorial event proceeded with military precision. Alexander stood at attention as elderly soldiers recounted stories of courage and sacrifice, their voices carrying across the palace courtyard to an audience of families and dignitaries. Each tale of heroism felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. These men had fought believing they were defending their homeland's freedom, never knowing that their sacrifices had preserved an elaborate illusion. Colonel Morrison, a decorated officer who had served in the border conflicts 20 years earlier, stepped forward to place a wreath at the memorial stone. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he spoke about fallen comrades who had died protecting Valdorian sovereignty. Alexander watched the old soldier's face and wondered if Morrison had any idea that those border conflicts had been orchestrated events, designed to maintain the appearance of external threats while strengthening the hidden control structure. After the ceremony, Alexander retreated to his study to prepare for the meeting with Lord Pemberton. The Prime Minister arrived precisely at 3 o'clock, carrying a leather portfolio that immediately caught Alexander's attention. Pemberton was a man in his late 50s with graying temples and the kind of understated elegance that marked generations of noble breeding. His family had served the crown for over 2 centuries, accumulating wealth and influence that extended far beyond Valdoria's borders. "Your Highness, thank you for making time during this busy period," Pemberton said, settling into the chair across from Alexander's desk. His manner was respectful but not deferential, suggesting a relationship built on mutual understanding rather than traditional royal protocol. "Of course, Prime Minister. You mentioned historical documents that would provide context for our economic discussions." Pemberton's eyes studied Alexander's face carefully before he opened his portfolio. "Indeed, there are certain aspects of our kingdom's development that aren't widely understood, even within government circles. Before we proceed with the economic summit, I believe it's important that you have a complete picture of our unique circumstances." Alexander's pulse quickened, but he maintained his composure. "I'm always interested in learning more about our history." "Yes, I'm sure you are." Pemberton withdrew a document from his portfolio, one that looked remarkably similar to the papers Alexander had discovered in the secret chamber. "This is a treaty signed by your great-grandfather in 1923. It's not in the public archives because its contents might be misunderstood by those who lack proper context." Alexander accepted the document, recognizing it as one he had seen before, but he played his part carefully, studying it as if for the first time. The agreement outlined economic cooperation between Valdoria and what appeared to be a consortium of international investors, but the terms were clearly unfavorable to Valdorian interests. "This seems to grant significant concessions to foreign entities," Alexander observed, keeping his tone neutral. "What was the reasoning behind such terms?" Pemberton leaned back in his chair, his expression becoming more serious. "Your great-grandfather faced circumstances that required difficult choices. The global economic crisis of the 1920s threatened to destroy smaller kingdoms like ours. The alternatives were economic collapse, political chaos, or finding partners who could provide stability in exchange for certain considerations. And these partners have continued their involvement in our affairs since then? Evolution would be a more accurate term than involvement, Your Highness. What began as emergency assistance has developed into a sophisticated partnership that benefits all parties involved. Valdoria has enjoyed unprecedented prosperity and stability while our partners have gained access to resources and markets that serve their interests." Alexander set the document aside, choosing his words carefully. "And the people of Valdoria? How do they benefit from arrangements they know nothing about?" For the first time, Pemberton's diplomatic mask slipped slightly. "That's a complex question, Your Highness. May I speak frankly? Please do. The average citizen of Valdoria enjoys a quality of life that exceeds most European nations. Our unemployment rate is negligible, our education system is world-class, our healthcare is comprehensive, and our social services are generous. These benefits are possible because our partnership allows us to leverage resources and expertise far beyond what a small kingdom could achieve independently. But they're achieved through deception." Pemberton was quiet for a long moment, studying Alexander's face intently. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that suggested years of careful consideration. "Your Highness, may I ask what prompted this particular line of inquiry?" Alexander had reached a crucial decision point. He could continue pretending ignorance, hoping to learn more while maintaining his cover, or he could confront Pemberton directly and demand the full truth. The choice would determine everything that followed. "Last night I discovered something that challenged my understanding of our family's history," Alexander said finally. "I found documents that suggest our sovereignty is not what it appears to be." Pemberton nodded slowly, as if he had been expecting this moment. "The hidden chamber beneath the library. I wondered when someone would find it again. Your grandfather sealed it after the war, but old palaces have a way of revealing their secrets eventually." The casual acknowledgement hit Alexander like a physical blow.
"You knew about the chamber?"
"Your Highness,
My family has served as intermediaries between the Crown and our international partners for over a century.
We know about all the chambers, all the documents,
and all the arrangements that keep this kingdom functioning. The question now is what you intend to do with this knowledge. Alexander felt the world shifting beneath his feet. Everything he had discovered, every revelation that had shattered his understanding of his life and future, was apparently common knowledge among certain circles within the government. His dramatic discovery was nothing more than a young prince finally being let in on family secrets. "How many people know?" he asked. "About the basic arrangement? Perhaps 20 individuals in key positions throughout the government and military. About the specific details and historical development? Fewer than 10, including your father and myself." "My father knows everything?" Pemberton's expression softened slightly. "Your Highness, your father has been managing this relationship for over 15 years. Every policy decision, every trade agreement, every diplomatic initiative has been carefully coordinated to maintain the balance that keeps Valdoria stable and prosperous. It's not the monarchy he expected to inherit, but it's the one he was given." Alexander stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city where people went about their daily lives, unaware that their kingdom's independence was an elaborate fiction.
"And my coronation?"
"Will I be expected to continue this partnership? That decision will ultimately be yours to make, Your Highness. But before you decide, you should understand the full scope of what you're considering." Pemberton rose from his chair and joined Alexander at the window. "Your grandfather tried to break free from these arrangements in the 1960s. He believed, as you might now, that honesty and true independence were worth any price. The economic pressure that followed brought the kingdom to the brink of collapse within 18 months. Unemployment soared, social services were cut to nothing, and civil unrest threatened the stability of the crown itself. So he surrendered. He made a choice between idealism and responsibility. The agreements were restructured to provide Valdoria with better terms and more autonomy in domestic affairs, but the basic relationship remained intact. The alternative was watching the kingdom tear itself apart." Alexander absorbed this information, understanding now why the documents from the 1960s had shown a temporary break in the pattern, before resuming with even more complex arrangements. His grandfather hadn't been weak or corrupt, he had been pragmatic in the face of impossible circumstances. "What about other nations?" Alexander asked. "Are we unique in these arrangements?" "Hardly. The modern world is far more interconnected than most people realize. Economic sovereignty is largely an illusion for smaller nations. The difference is that Valdoria's arrangements are more formalized and comprehensive than most. We've traded some autonomy for stability and prosperity." Pemberton returned to his chair and withdrew another set of documents. "These are the current agreements that govern our relationship with our partners. I think you'll find them more sophisticated than the historical documents you discovered. The terms have evolved considerably over the decades." Alexander studied the new documents, which were indeed more complex than anything he had seen in the hidden chamber. The modern agreements were structured as business partnerships rather than subordination treaties. Valdoria maintained control over most domestic policies while coordinating economic and foreign policy decisions with a consortium of international interests. The arrangements included provisions for regular review and renegotiation, suggesting that the relationship could evolve further over time. There were also clauses that allowed for gradual increased independence as Valdoria's economy developed and its strategic value changed. "These don't look like the work of puppet masters," Alexander admitted. "They're more like alliance agreements with economic components."
Exactly. The relationship has matured considerably since your great-grandfather's desperate negotiations in the 1920s.
Our partners have learned that heavy-handed control is counterproductive, and we've learned that complete independence isn't always in our best interests. Alexander set the documents aside, his mind racing through the implications. If the current arrangements were truly partnerships rather than domination, then perhaps there was room for reform rather than revolution. Maybe he could work within the system to gradually increase Valdorian autonomy without triggering the economic catastrophe that had forced his grandfather's surrender.
"There's something else you need to understand," Pemberton continued. "The people who know about these arrangements aren't villains or traitors.
They're individuals who've dedicated their lives to making the best possible decisions for Valdoria given the constraints we face. Your father carries this burden every day, making choices that serve the kingdom's long-term interests even when they conflict with his personal preferences." The weight of that statement settled on Alexander's shoulders. His father, whom he had begun to see as complicit in betraying the kingdom, was actually trapped in an impossible situation. Trying to serve his people while navigating a web of constraints and obligations that limited his options at every turn.
What happens now? Alexander asked.
That depends on you, Your Highness. You can choose to work within the existing framework, perhaps pushing for gradual reforms that increase our autonomy over time. You can attempt to renegotiate the fundamental terms of our partnerships, though that carries significant risks. Or you can try to break free completely, understanding that the consequences might be catastrophic. Alexander returned to his desk, feeling older than he had just hours before. The simple certainties of his previous life had been replaced by complex moral calculations that offered no clear answers. "There's a fourth option," Pemberton said quietly. "You could choose not to take the crown at all." The suggestion hung in the air between them like a challenge. Alexander had never seriously considered abdication, but now the possibility seemed almost appealing. He could walk away from the throne, leave the kingdom to his sister Sophia, and pursue a life free from the weight of these terrible compromises. But even as the thought formed, Alexander realized it was a selfish escape rather than a solution. Sophia would eventually face the same choices he was confronting now. Worse, she might be even less prepared to navigate these treacherous waters, having been deliberately kept in the dark about the kingdom's true circumstances. "I need to understand more about our current partners," Alexander said finally. "Who are they? What do they want, and how much flexibility exists within our agreements?" Pemberton smiled for the first time since the meeting began. "Now you're asking the right questions, Your Highness. The consortium includes representatives from several major economic powers, multinational corporations with interests in natural resources and manufacturing, and financial institutions that facilitate global trade. Their primary goals are market stability, resource access, and profitable returns on their investments. And their methods? Sophisticated and largely invisible to the general public. They prefer influence over control, guidance over commands. The old model of foreign domination was inefficient and generated too much resistance. Modern partnerships are designed to align interests rather than impose will." Alexander studied the documents again, this time looking for leverage points and potential areas for renegotiation. The agreements were complex enough to offer multiple interpretations of key clauses, suggesting that skilled negotiation might be able to achieve better terms for Valdoria without triggering the economic retaliation that had crushed his grandfather's independence movement. "I want to meet with them," Alexander said suddenly. "Not as a junior partner being informed of decisions, but as an equal discussing the future of our relationship." Pemberton's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's unprecedented, Your Highness. Traditionally, contact between the royal family and our partners has been managed through intermediaries like myself. Then it's time to change tradition. If I'm going to inherit these relationships, I need to understand who I'm dealing with and what room exists for modification. Such a meeting would require extensive preparation and careful diplomatic groundwork. Our partners value discretion and prefer to maintain the illusion that Valdoria's government operates independently. Nevertheless, I want to explore the possibility. In the meantime, I need complete access to all relevant documents and agreements. No more hidden chambers or secret archives. If I'm to make informed decisions about the kingdom's future, I need to understand our complete history and current obligations." Pemberton nodded slowly. "I can arrange that, Your Highness, but I must caution you that knowledge brings responsibility. Once you understand the full scope of our arrangements, you'll be committed to either maintaining them or managing the consequences of changing them." "I understand. But I refuse to inherit a crown while remaining ignorant of what that crown really represents." After Pemberton left, Alexander sat alone in his study, contemplating the dramatic shift in his circumstances. That morning, he had been a prince who believed he understood his destiny. Now he was a future king who realized he understood nothing about the kingdom he would inherit. The documents spread across his desk told a story far more complex than the simple narrative of foreign domination he had initially imagined. The reality was a web of relationships, obligations, and interdependencies that had evolved over generations into something that defied easy categorization. Alexander's phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The caller ID showed his sister's name. "Alexander, are you all right?" Sophia's voice carried genuine concern. "You seemed distracted during dinner, and Father mentioned you had an important meeting with the Prime Minister today." "I'm fine, Sophia. Just dealing with some complex policy matters related to the economic summit. You know you can talk to me about anything, right? I may not be heir to the throne, but I understand the pressures you're facing." The innocent offer of support from his sister, who had no idea about the secrets that surrounded their family, made Alexander's heart ache. How could he protect her from this knowledge while still preparing her for a future that might require her to make the same impossible choices.
I know, and I appreciate that more than you realize, but this particular situation requires careful handling.
Just remember that whatever decisions you make will affect all of us. The family, the kingdom, the people we serve. Don't try to carry everything alone. After ending the call, Alexander reflected on Sophia's words.
She was right that his choices would affect everyone, but she couldn't know the true scope of those potential consequences. Every option he was considering carried risks that extended far beyond the royal family, to encompass the entire kingdom and its people.
The young prince who had discovered the hidden chamber just days ago had believed he faced a simple choice between truth and lies. The future king, who now understood the reality of his inheritance, knew that the choice was far more complex, involving calculations about prosperity versus autonomy, stability versus honesty, and pragmatism versus idealism. As evening fell over the palace, Alexander began to formulate a plan. He would learn everything there was to know about Valdoria's partnerships and obligations. He would meet with the foreign interests who shaped his kingdom's policies. He would explore every possible option for modifying the current arrangements. But most importantly, he would find a way to honor both his commitment to truth and his duty to protect his people. There had to be a path that didn't require choosing between his principles and his kingdom's welfare. The game had indeed begun, and Alexander was determined to play it better than any of his predecessors. The crown would be his to wear, but the terms under which he wore it would be his to negotiate. 3 weeks after his conversation with Lord Pemberton, Alexander found himself in Geneva, Switzerland, preparing for a meeting that no Valdorian royal had attended in over 50 years. The location was deliberately neutral, a private conference room in an exclusive hotel that catered to international businessmen and diplomats who preferred to conduct their affairs away from public scrutiny. Alexander had spent those 3 weeks immersing himself in documents that revealed the true complexity of Valdoria's international relationships. The consortium that influenced his kingdom's policies consisted of representatives from 6 major economic powers, 12 multinational corporations, and 4 international financial institutions. Their interests were diverse but aligned around maintaining stable markets, secure resource access, and profitable returns on long-term investments. What surprised Alexander most was the sophisticated nature of their operations. These weren't shadowy puppet masters controlling kingdoms from dark rooms. They were highly educated professionals managing complex international relationships with the same expertise that major corporations applied to global business development. Their methods were subtle, their goals were pragmatic, and their success depended on maintaining partnerships that appeared mutually beneficial rather than exploitative. The lead representative for Alexander's meeting was Dr. Elena Vasquez, a former Spanish Minister of Finance who now directed international development for the consortium. Her credentials were impressive. Doctorate in International Economics from Oxford, 15 years of experience in government service, and a reputation for finding innovative solutions to complex political and economic challenges. Alexander arrived at the hotel precisely on time, accompanied only by a single security officer who remained outside the conference room. The decision to attend with minimal entourage was deliberate, intended to signal that this was a conversation between equals rather than a formal diplomatic negotiation. Dr. Vasquez greeted him with professional courtesy. She was a woman in her early 50s, with silver-streaked black hair and intelligent dark eyes that seemed to assess everything they encountered. Her manner suggested someone accustomed to dealing with powerful people on equal terms. Your Highness, thank you for requesting this meeting. It's unusual for us to have direct contact with royal family members, but circumstances sometimes require adjustments to protocol. I appreciate your willingness to meet, Dr. Vasquez. I believe it's time for all parties to have a clearer understanding of our mutual interests and expectations. She gestured for him to take a seat at the small conference table, where folders containing relevant documents had been discreetly arranged. Before we begin, I want to emphasize that our consortium has always viewed Valdoria as a valued partner rather than a subordinate entity. Our relationship has evolved considerably since its inception, and we're committed to ensuring that it continues to serve everyone's interests effectively. Alexander opened the folder nearest to him, revealing financial projections and economic analyses that painted a detailed picture of Valdoria's integration into the global economy. The numbers were encouraging. The kingdom's GDP had grown consistently for decades, unemployment remained below 3%, and social indicators placed Valdoria among the most prosperous nations in Europe. These results are impressive, Alexander acknowledged, but they raise questions about what Valdoria might achieve if it had complete autonomy over its economic policies. Dr.
Vasquez smiled slightly. That's an excellent question, and one we've analyzed extensively. Our economic modeling suggests that complete independence would initially result in a 12 to 15% reduction in GDP, primarily due to the loss of preferential trade relationships and technological partnerships that are currently available through our consortium. She opened her own folder and withdrew a set of charts that illustrated various scenarios for Valdorian economic development. Over time, an independent Valdoria might recover much of that lost ground, but the transition period would be difficult. Unemployment would likely rise to 8 or 10%. Government services would require significant cuts, and the kingdom would need to renegotiate all of its international agreements from a position of reduced leverage. Alexander studied the projections carefully. The analysis appeared thorough and objective, acknowledging both the costs of the current relationship and the potential benefits of independence. What about political autonomy? How much flexibility exists within our current arrangements for Valdoria to modify its domestic policies? Considerable flexibility, actually. Our consortium has learned that heavy-handed interference in domestic affairs is counterproductive and generates unnecessary resentment. As long as major economic and foreign policy decisions are coordinated with our interests, Valdoria retains substantial autonomy over internal governance. Dr. Vasquez withdrew another document that outlined the specific areas where consultation was required versus those where Valdoria maintained complete independence. The list was surprisingly reasonable, focusing primarily on trade agreements, resource development contracts, and diplomatic relationships that could affect regional stability. For example, she continued, your kingdom's recent education reforms were developed and implemented entirely through your domestic political process. The environmental protection legislation passed last year required no consultation with our consortium. Even your military modernization program was designed according to Valdorian strategic priorities, though we did provide technical assistance and financing options. Alexander was beginning to understand that the relationship was more nuanced than he had initially assumed. The consortium's influence was significant but not absolute, sophisticated but not oppressive. They appeared to prefer guidance to control, recognizing that sustainable partnerships required genuine mutual benefit rather than one-sided exploitation. I'm curious about the evolution of this relationship, Alexander said. How did we move from the crisis-driven agreements of the 1920s to the current partnership model? Gradual adaptation based on changing circumstances and learned experience, Dr. Vasquez replied. The original agreements were indeed quite restrictive, designed primarily to stabilize Valdoria's economy during a period of global upheaval. But we discovered that excessive control was inefficient and generated resistance that threatened the stability we were trying to create. She described how the relationship had been restructured multiple times over the decades, with each revision providing Valdoria with greater autonomy while maintaining the consortium's core interests. The process had been evolutionary rather than revolutionary, allowing both parties to adapt to changing global conditions while preserving the essential elements that made their partnership valuable. Your grandfather's attempt to achieve complete independence in the 1960s was actually a turning point, Dr. Vasquez explained. The economic pressure that forced him to resume the relationship demonstrated to both sides that the old model was unsustainable. The renegotiated agreements that followed were much more balanced and have served as the foundation for our current arrangements. Alexander leaned back in his chair, processing the implications of what he was learning. The story was more complex than either complete independence or foreign domination. Valdoria existed in a state of managed autonomy, with significant domestic freedom constrained by international obligations that provided economic benefits and political stability. What would happen if I, as future king, wanted to modify our current agreements? Alexander asked directly. Dr. Vasquez considered the question carefully before responding. That would depend on the nature of the modifications you had in mind. Adjustments to improve efficiency or address changing circumstances are always welcome. More fundamental changes would require extensive negotiation and might involve trade-offs that could affect Valdoria's economic position. She opened another folder containing what appeared to be a policy framework for potential future modifications. We've actually been developing some ideas for the next phase of our relationship, recognizing that Valdoria's enhanced economic position provides opportunities for increased autonomy in certain areas. The proposals were intriguing. They outlined a gradual transition that would give Valdoria greater control over its domestic policies and foreign trade relationships while maintaining coordination on major strategic decisions. The timeline extended over 15 years, allowing for careful management of the transition to avoid economic disruption. This looks like a pathway toward eventual independence, Alexander observed.
Not independence exactly, but something closer to the relationship that major European nations maintain with international economic institutions.
Valdoria would become a fully sovereign partner rather than a managed ally.
Alexander spent the next hour discussing specific aspects of the proposed transition, exploring the possibilities and limitations of each phase.
The conversation was professional and constructive, far different from the adversarial negotiation he had expected. As the meeting concluded, Dr. Royal Waya Vasquez made an offer that surprised him. Your Highness, if you're serious about exploring modifications to our relationship, I'd like to invite you to spend a week with our consortium next month. You could observe our operations, meet with other partner nations, and develop a better understanding of how these relationships function in practice. Other partner nations? Valdoria isn't unique, Your Highness. About 40 nations worldwide maintain similar relationships with various international consortiums. Most of them are significantly smaller than major powers, but too large to remain completely isolated. The modern world requires a level of economic integration that makes complete independence increasingly impractical for nations of our size. The revelation that Valdoria was part of a larger pattern rather than a unique case of foreign control shifted Alexander's perspective once again. If dozens of other nations had found ways to balance autonomy with integration, perhaps there were lessons to be learned from their experiences. I'm interested in your invitation, Alexander said, but I'll need to coordinate with my father and the Prime Minister before making any commitments. Of course. And Your Highness, I want to assure you that our consortium's primary interest is maintaining stable, profitable relationships with our partners. We have no desire to control kingdoms that prefer independence, nor do we benefit from partnerships that generate resentment or resistance. As Alexander prepared to leave, Dr. Vasquez handed him a final document. This contains contact information for representatives from 3 other partner nations whose situations are similar to Valdoria's. They've all successfully modified their relationships with international consortiums over the past decade. Their experiences might provide valuable insights for your own considerations. The flight back to Valdoria gave Alexander time to reflect on everything he had learned. The meeting had challenged his assumptions about the nature of his kingdom's international relationships, revealing a system that was more flexible and less oppressive than he had feared. But it had also highlighted the complexity of the choices he faced. Complete independence remained possible, but would exact a significant economic and social cost. The current system provided prosperity and stability but constrained Valdoria's autonomy in important ways. The proposed transition offered a middle path, but would require careful negotiation and skillful management to achieve successfully. As his plane descended toward Aurelia's airport, Alexander realized that his discovery in the hidden chamber had been just the beginning of a much larger journey. The documents he had found there told only part of a story that was still being written. His task now was to help write the next chapter in a way that honored both his principles and his responsibilities to the people of Valdoria. The crown was still his to inherit, but the terms under which he would wear it were his to negotiate. And for the first time since discovering the truth about his kingdom, Alexander felt optimistic about his ability to find a path that served everyone's interests while preserving his integrity and his nation's dignity. 6 months later, Alexander stood before the assembled Parliament of Valdoria, preparing to deliver the most important speech of his life. The ancient chamber was filled to capacity with members of both houses, government ministers, foreign dignitaries, and selected representatives from civil society. Today marked not only his formal acceptance of the role of heir apparent, but also the announcement of a new direction for the kingdom that would reshape its relationships with the world. The journey to this moment had been extraordinary. Alexander's week with the international consortium had opened his eyes to a global network of partnerships that he had never imagined existed. He had met with representatives from nations across Europe, Asia, and South America, each managing their own complex relationships with international economic powers while maintaining varying degrees of domestic autonomy. The most enlightening conversations had been with Crown Prince Eric of Denmark and President Maria Santos of Costa Rica, both of whom had successfully renegotiated their nation's international partnerships during the previous decade. Their experiences had provided Alexander with practical insights into the negotiation strategies and political approaches that could achieve meaningful reform without triggering economic retaliation. Armed with this knowledge, Alexander had returned to Valdoria and embarked on the most delicate diplomatic mission of his life. Working closely with Lord Pemberton and a small team of trusted advisors, he had spent 4 months negotiating a comprehensive revision of Valdoria's agreements with the international consortium. The result was the Aurelia Accord, named after the capital city where it was finalized.
The agreement represented a fundamental restructuring of the relationship between Valdoria and its international partners, providing the kingdom with unprecedented autonomy while maintaining the economic benefits that had made the original partnership valuable. Under the new arrangements, Valdoria would gain complete control over its domestic policies, including education, healthcare, social services, and internal governance structures. The kingdom would also acquire the right to pursue independent trade relationships with nations outside the consortium, though major agreements would still require consultation to ensure compatibility with existing commitments. In exchange, Valdoria would maintain its participation in the consortium's economic development programs and continue to provide access to its natural resources under terms that had been renegotiated to be more favorable to the kingdom. The country would also commit to a gradual transition period during which current arrangements would be modified step by step to avoid economic disruption. Perhaps most significantly, the Aurelia Accord included provisions for eventual complete independence if Valdoria chose that path after a 15-year transition period. The kingdom would have the option to terminate all formal relationships with the consortium while maintaining normal diplomatic and trade connections as a fully sovereign nation. But the diplomatic negotiations had been only part of Alexander's challenge. He had also needed to address the more personal question of how to handle the knowledge he had gained about his family's history and the kingdom's true circumstances. After extensive conversations with his father, King Charles, Alexander had learned that the burden of managing these secret relationships had weighed heavily on the monarch for years. The king had struggled with the same moral conflicts that Alexander was experiencing, questioning whether the prosperity and stability they brought to Valdoria justified the deception required to maintain them. "I've spent 15 years making decisions that served our people's welfare while compromising my personal integrity," King Charles had confided during one of their private discussions. Every policy announcement, every diplomatic initiative, every public statement has carried the weight of knowledge that most of our citizens don't share. The conversation had led to a joint decision that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. King Charles would use the announcement of Alexander's new role to begin a gradual process of public education about Valdoria's international relationships, preparing the people for a future where they could make informed decisions about their kingdom's direction. The process would be careful and measured, designed to avoid the shock and confusion that might result from sudden revelations. Over the next several years, the government would gradually introduce more transparency about international partnerships, economic relationships, and the complex realities of modern sovereignty for smaller nations.
Standing now before Parliament, Alexander felt the weight of history on his shoulders.
The speech he was about to deliver would begin a transformation that would affect every citizen of Valdoria, changing their understanding of their kingdom's place in the world while opening new possibilities for their future. Honourable members of Parliament, distinguished guests, fellow citizens of Valdoria, Alexander began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "Today we stand at a crossroads that will define our kingdom's future for generations to come." He paused, looking out at faces that represented the full spectrum of Valdorian society. Some knew portions of the truth he was about to reveal, while others would be hearing these revelations for the first time. For nearly a century, our kingdom has navigated the challenges of the modern world through partnerships that have brought us prosperity and stability, but which have also required compromises that haven't always been fully understood by our people. Today, I want to begin a conversation about those partnerships and about the choices we face as we move forward into an uncertain but promising future. Alexander outlined the history of Valdoria's international relationships, beginning with the economic crisis of the 1920s that had forced his great-grandfather to seek foreign assistance. He explained how those emergency measures had evolved into sophisticated partnerships that provided economic benefits while constraining political autonomy. The chamber was remarkably quiet as Alexander spoke, with Parliament members listening intently to revelations that challenged many of their assumptions about their nation's governance. He was careful to emphasize that these arrangements had been entered into with good intentions and had produced tangible benefits for the Valdorian people. The question before us now is not whether past decisions were right or wrong. Alexander continued. The question is what kind of future we want to build and how we can achieve it, while honoring both our values and our responsibilities to one another. He then announced the Aurelia Accord, explaining its provisions and describing the transition process that would give Valdoria greater control over its destiny, while maintaining beneficial economic relationships. The agreement represented a middle path between the extremes of continued dependence and precipitous independence. This accord provides us with something that has been rare in international relations: the opportunity to modify fundamental agreements through negotiation rather than confrontation. We can move toward greater autonomy without sacrificing the stability and prosperity that have defined our kingdom for generations. Alexander concluded his speech by addressing the personal dimensions of the revelations he had shared. I understand that learning about these arrangements may challenge your trust in the institutions that have governed our kingdom. I ask you to remember that every decision made by my predecessors was guided by their commitment to serving the people of Valdoria, even when those decisions required difficult compromises. The response to Alexander's speech was mixed but generally positive. Some parliament members expressed concern about the economic risks of modifying long-standing international relationships. Others questioned whether the transition process would provide sufficient autonomy to justify its complexity and duration. But most representatives seemed to appreciate the honesty of Alexander's approach and the careful balance he had achieved between reform and stability. The Aurelia Accord offered a path forward that addressed legitimate concerns about sovereignty while avoiding the dangers of sudden change. In the weeks that followed, public reaction proved similarly varied but ultimately supportive. Opinion polls showed that most Valdorians were surprised by the revelations about their kingdom's international partnerships, but approved of the approach Alexander had taken to address them. The gradual transparency initiative that King Charles had announced proved particularly popular. Citizens appreciated being trusted with information about their government's operations and expressed confidence that increased openness would lead to better decisions about the kingdom's future. Perhaps most importantly, the international community responded positively to Valdoria's new approach. Other nations that maintained similar partnerships with international consortiums expressed interest in learning from the Aurelia Accord model. Several smaller European kingdoms began exploring whether similar renegotiations might be possible for their own circumstances. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the consortium representative who had met with Alexander in Geneva, later described the agreement as a model for how international partnerships could evolve to meet changing expectations about sovereignty and democratic governance. The consortium had actually benefited from the renegotiation, gaining a more stable and cooperative partner while reducing the administrative costs of managing relationships that required constant delicate handling. 1 year after delivering his historic speech to Parliament, Alexander reflected on the transformation that had occurred in both his personal understanding and his kingdom's circumstances. The crown he would inherit was indeed heavier than he had originally imagined, but its weight came from responsibility rather than deception. Valdoria still faced challenges and uncertainties as it navigated its transition toward greater autonomy. The economic benefits of international partnership needed to be balanced against the desire for political independence. The gradual transparency process required careful management to avoid confusion or unrealistic expectations. But for the first time in generations, the kingdom's future direction was being shaped by informed choices rather than hidden constraints. The people of Valdoria could participate meaningfully in decisions about their nation's development, understanding both the opportunities and trade-offs involved in different approaches to international relationships. Alexander's discovery of the secret chamber beneath the palace library had begun as a personal crisis that threatened to shatter his understanding of his life and destiny. It had evolved into an opportunity to transform not only his own relationship with the crown, but the fundamental nature of the monarchy itself. The young prince who had stumbled upon hidden documents during a thunderstorm had become a future king who understood that true leadership required the courage to challenge comfortable lies in service of difficult truths. The crown's secret had been revealed not as a source of shame, but as an opportunity for redemption. As Alexander stood once again at his bedroom window, looking out over the city of Aurelia, he saw not subjects living under an elaborate deception, but citizens participating in an ongoing conversation about their shared future. The lights of the capital sparkled in the darkness, each one representing a family whose lives had been touched by the transformation he had helped to achieve. The storm that had revealed the hidden chamber was long past, but its impact continued to ripple through the kingdom, like waves spreading across still water. Change was never easy, and the path forward would require continued courage and wisdom from everyone involved. But Alexander had learned that the weight of a crown could be borne with honor when it rested on a foundation of truth rather than lies. The secrets that had once threatened to destroy his faith in the monarchy had instead become the foundation for its renewal. The Kingdom of Valdoria entered a new era, not as a puppet state or a completely independent nation, but as something more complex and perhaps more honest. A small country navigating the realities of the modern world with clear eyes and an open commitment to serving its people's genuine interests. And in the royal quarters of Blackstone Palace, a future king slept peacefully for the first time since discovering that the truth, however complex and challenging,
was always preferable to the most comfortable lie.